Nice to be here with you in this online virtual reality. A new experience for me, offering a webinar like this through the Center for Practice Transformation at the University of Minnesota, and I'm very excited about it. Ironically, it's very funny. All things group work, we talk so much about intentionality of the size of group that's really functional for really conveying the experience of group work and using group work in intentional ways. Today's purpose is quite the opposite in a way. 336 people in this room. I can't see myself, I can't see you, but nonetheless, we are a group. I'm excited about the offerings that I can offer through the Center for Practice Transformation. April 7th, I will be doing a day-long training on the use and the kind of fundamentals of both group work as a method of practice, as well as integrating it with providing clinical supervision in social work. And I've offered this 3 times, I think, so far, 2 of which have been online. It's a really excellent opportunity to talk with other folks who are either already providing some clinical supervision in their worlds or maybe just getting started. And I'm a big believer in the power of group work for teaching, coaching, supporting, mentoring new professionals in the context of clinical supervision. So that's what we're going to spend a day talking about. So I hope you'll join me at that point. Today's conversation was really on the heels of 2 years of all of us being forced online to do that which so many of us do and have a heart for, sitting with people in the real ether of a group room or a classroom, a university, college setting, even hosting our team meetings or hosting a staff meeting. We're so used to being with other people, but these last 2 years has called us to operate in a different way. So today what I wanted to do was give us all a chance to just stop for a minute and look back at what we've done by way of delivering these kinds of services in the virtual planet of online and all the various platforms that we're all using. And hear a review maybe of really what's effective practice when we're thinking about group work in general, and how do we need to step up our game if we're going to really provide some functional, effective experiences in the online platform. And I think it's possible. Peter, would you initiate the poll? And I'm hoping that we'll be able to see it populate live. And then I want to begin there, and then we're gonna take off running.
Nope.
I think maybe it just got launched and it's, oh, there we go. Now we got some people going for it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. So just as I suspected, we're going to have people representing a number of roles from clinical social worker, psychotherapist operating in the therapy context, some college university professors, and some supervisor managers. Looks like mostly social service managers, but we're seeing some people in the non-mental health social service world who are operating and needing to host meetings in their context and business. A few K-12 teachers. This is really helpful for me to see who I'm speaking with today. Kind of that rule number one, right? Know your audience.
Looks like it's about finished up here. A few more people.
Yep, therapy groups being run, support groups, staff meetings, task groups. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to wind it up. There you go.
Perfect.
Are you seeing the results?
I am seeing the results. So what I want to know most here at this point, mostly people are using Zoom, which is my experience as well. Biggest challenges. I'm just going to read some of these to get it in the room here. My own discomfort being on camera and facilitating virtually. Yeah, it's a challenge for sure. Participants not turning on their camera, which makes fostering connections between people very difficult, more difficult for sure. Participants don't seem engaged in the meeting. Participants seem to be multitasking. I struggle with having too much information for the time allotted. Managing the chat. Not having clarity about my agenda. And participants absent or not showing up. I must say, I'm pretty impressed with my predictions. As you'll see as we talk the rest of the day. Peter, will this poll be available to me in a summary form somehow?
Yeah, it will.
Perfect. Okay, so we can send that away. I can get it out of my way here. Okay. Okay, so with that, we're going to start. I'm going to start. Here's what I hope to do today. Really give you a chance, like I said, to pause and say, what have I been doing the last 2 years with regarding using this online platform as a way to do the work that I do in whatever context that you're working in. I want to root our conversation in really, in some ways, 2 primary frameworks. The first one is called the community of inquiry model. And the second context or framework that I want us thinking about is really just fundamentally that what we understand about the stages of group development. And then we're going to really talk turkey about some specifics, so specific skills, tools, and practices that will really ensure that you're effective in your facilitation of a group, a staff meeting, a training, a classroom experience, or a therapy group or a support group. So that specific list is embedded in the PowerPoint, and I'm assuming you'll all have access to that. So you'll have this kind of concrete notes to take away from today's conversation. I'm going to spend a little bit of time about the community of inquiry model, a little bit of time on stages, and then we'll talk turkey on the more specifics towards the end. So community of theory, excuse me, community of inquiry theory comes out of some research by Garrison, Anderson, and Archer, and it emanated in like early 2000s on the advent really of more online education. Certainly over time, and this comes out of higher education and academia in that context, but it has every context bearing in our therapy, mental health, social services world as well. And that is when we're hosting a meeting, when we're facilitating a support group or a therapy group, when we're hosting a training, we're really intending to create a community experience, even if for an hour, even if for 2 hours every week, even if for a day-long experience, that the people that have gathered in this platform, in this arena, we're a community. And the facilitator, if they're thinking in terms of community of inquiry theory, they're attending to 3 elements. I'm going to tell a story first, and then I'm going to talk to you about these elements: social presence, cognitive presence, and teaching presence. I'm 55 years old. My undergraduate degree was in the 80s. I went to class at St. Kate's, sat in a room with 25 other students, most typically. When I went to my graduate program in the mid-90s, still yet I went in person and sat with 20 other people and was a part of a classroom community. When I got my doctorate, I went to the University of St. Thomas, St. Catherine University in 2014. It was a 3-year DSW program, all online. So that was my first experience as a learner being in this online world. And I can tell you that I never in 3 years' time found my social presence in this online environment. The way that I knew I could find my social presence when I walked into the classroom at St. Kate's or St. Thomas in my undergraduate or graduate degree. I could visit with my peers. I'd be proactive and raise my hand to ask a question. I'd be responsive to a question asked of me. I could connect with the faculty member. I was present. I could find my way in the room. In the digital world, in the online world, in the virtual world, students need to do that as well. Clients need to do that as well. They need to find their way, that the way they would naturally if they stepped into a support group with 6 or 8 people in someone's office. We're striving for that same ability in the online platform, and it's something to be really thoughtful about. So these 3 elements that comprise an effective community of inquiry, an effective community, a connected community, it requires that students or participants, group members have a social presence. It's their ability to identify with the community, to feel connected, to communicate purposefully with each other, the other folks in the group, to develop some actual relationships, and to project their own personality in the space. And I love that language of space, because for me it mirrors what it feels like to walk into a classroom in that space. If I think in those terms about when I'm online, I'm trying to create a sense of a space where people can exist and interact and connect. Likewise, as a teacher, as a group worker, a group facilitator, as a meeting facilitator, as a person running a staff meeting, that person has to have some teaching presence. They have to find their way in the space. And the next part of my story is when I finished my doctorate, I worked at St. Thomas for a year as a faculty member teaching full-time. And then I went to Walden University and I teach full-time in this online program. And I've had no problem finding my teaching presence. And I was so grateful to have the prediction that I was going to have students in my classroom environment that were going to have a hard time finding their social presence, that I had to be deliberate about what I was going to do and how I was going to hold space for my students to show up and feel comfortable and to find their way to existing and being connected in the platform. And then finally, there's this idea of cognitive presence. And in academia, that's talking about the content. What content is the faculty member bringing forward? What content is the group worker bringing forward to this 8-week therapy group or this 8-week support group? The cognitive presence means what we all work with intellectually or emotionally. The facilitator is primarily responsible for bringing that forward. But if you're a constructivist sort of thinker like I am, you believe that the meaning that we make of the material at hand happens both because of and as a result of the work of the facilitator and the participants, that we're all responsible for making meaning of this material. But the facilitator is, of course, setting the stage. So as a group worker, as a staff meeting facilitator, as a trainer, as a faculty member, you have to be very thoughtful about how will I create a community of inquiry that's cognizant of each of these elements. How do I find my way and how do I share who I am? How do I support and facilitate every participant's ability to show up in the room and be present and have a sense of who they are demonstrated in the room? And how do I guide the matter at hand, the content, the meeting agenda, the material that we're all going to kind of chew on and make sense of and make meaning of? That is operating in group work, just fundamentally operating in group work, informed by each of these elements are always emotion or should be attended to. They're not just going to happen by accident. Let's see. I think that's all I want to say about that. So again, this idea of community of inquiry comes out of academia, but it has every bearing in our world as social workers or therapists. I have often thought about the classroom, whether it's K-12 or whether it's higher ed, as a group. And I think about my classroom teaching as though I was facilitating a group experience. The next thing I would like to contend that we ought to be informed by, if we're wanting to establish and facilitate effective groups experiences, is that of recognizing that while there's a lot that's unpredictable in how groups unfold and how meetings unfold and how trainings unfold, there is also a lot that's quite predictable. And if we ground our thinking in really simple beginning, middle, end stages of group development, there are some things that are predictable. And those things have to do with these three aspects. At the beginning stage of group, what can we predict our participants, our group members, our staff members are likely to do or feel? Well, the first time someone goes to a therapy group or a group at all, they're probably a little bit anxious. They might be a little bit like hesitant to engage. They're a little non-committal. They might do something like sort of engage and then sort of pull back and avoid and detach. They kind of want to connect and be accepted in this space, but they're not sure if it's safe. They're not sure if it's worth it. They're not sure if they want to get invested in this experience. And whether that experience is a 1-hour meeting or whether that experience is an 8-week therapy group, that's where participants are. What needs to happen if you want to move past that and move this group forward is there has to be space for the group to get to participants to get to know each other. There has to be clarity of purpose. There has to be an opportunity for the group members to have a little preview of what's to come and get oriented. They have to understand that they have a voice in establishing the norms and expectations of the experience. What has to happen right from the start is patterns of communication are going to get established, so you might as well get in front of it and try to establish ones that are useful. And there has to be some structure. Now, in the group room, you got 8 people coming to a therapy group for the first time, and you welcome into your office, and there's a couple of couches, and people are sitting around, and it naturally happens in a circle. And you do introductions, and most typically, you go around the circle. And there's this sort of built-in structure of even that simple task of people introducing themselves. But while you're facilitating an online therapy group with 8 participants, and we're all in DoxyMe or Zoom or whatever platform you're using to run a therapy group, you see the Brady Bunch boxes across the screen. And you can't rely on that natural circle structure for people to just easily jump in and introduce themselves, especially at the first night when people are feeling a little bit hesitant. And people are feeling much like you all described in the poll. They don't like to see themselves on camera. They're feeling awkward. So your job, you have a lot of jobs as the facilitator, is to affect what needs to happen in this first night, this early stage of development. You're going to be more active than you might otherwise be in a group. You're going to work really hard to get members to talk to each other. Again, if you were sitting in a group room, physically in person with one another, and Alice says to me, the facilitator, I really liked what Sally just said. I quickly can say to Alice, go ahead and tell Sally that directly, so that people don't start to communicate through me. The same task needs to happen while we're online. And so as a facilitator of an online group, you have to get comfortable Especially at the beginning, I like to call it directing traffic. You're going to be a little bit more directive because that natural physical structure is not there. So when I do introductions with 8 people on the screen, I might say, Sam, you're sitting next to me. Would you be willing to start tonight? Go ahead and introduce yourself about where you're from and why you came tonight. Sam finishes. I might say, thanks, Sam. I appreciate you going first. Sally, would you go next? And I'm going to call on each person while we're online, because otherwise we have this weird, awkward sense in this online world. Everyone's waiting. You can't quite read the social cues about how to go next or when to go next. So it's okay to be more active in your directing traffic, calling on people in the online environment when you're first starting a group. Just like in group work, over time, you hope the facilitator can take a step back a bit and the group will be a little bit more empowered to run themselves. But you can't count on that at first. The group needs you to take your role as facilitator seriously and to accept the authority to be directive, to be active. So beginning stages of group development, there's some predictable things. Middle stage of group development, now maybe you're in week 4 of an 8-week therapy group, for instance. What's predictable? Well, participants are starting to test the situation. They're starting to feel like they're willing to take a few more risks, maybe. They're feeling a little bit more valued. They're starting to see each other as unique people. They're moving forward in that interconnected, interpersonal way. And what needs to happen is continuing to allow space for members to get to know each other. Definitely a clarity of purpose. And that participants are feeling invested in this is my group. Online, same thing applies, that when your participants are maybe questioning the purpose of the group or the agenda for the evening. When we're in person, you might be able to, again, read body language in a way that you don't necessarily read online. So as a facilitator, it's okay to be more direct and more out loud, checking in with your participants about where are they? So how are people feeling about the clarity of our purpose of our group? Could you guys write in the chat like the top reason that you think our group exists? What's our primary purpose? Put that in the chat. And now I've got everybody engaged again, and we can have a conversation. And I can respond to that as a facilitator and get people talking about that in a way that I might have been able to see happen non-verbally if we were in person. So it's okay to ask more questions, to check in, to ask people to either verbally respond to your question, to ask people to put that in the chat, and then you go ahead and read out the chat and then facilitate the conversation from there. But just getting more and more ways and reasons for people to tell you verbally what you might be able to notice in person non-verbally. So paying attention in the online environment that we're sort of, we're not stuck or we're not sunk because we don't have as much nonverbal verbal communication cues to see, but we just have to use other ways to draw it out and to make space for people to say what's on their minds. Ending stages of group development. If we're informed by this model, we know that the end of 8 weeks, support group or a therapy group, there's going to be a lot of ambivalence. Some people are going to be thrilled that this group is almost over and get me offline. Others are going to be sad about the group ending and not want it to end. And hopefully you've got a group of 8 people who have existed in this online space, but have really begun to be connected to one another. So what needs to happen is that you need to make space to talk about what has happened in these 8 weeks in this online environment. And even naming the fact that this support group, this therapy group, was a different experience than one you've had before where you've gone to an office and you've been together with people. And how has that been different? And making space for your participants participants to name that. Again, asking really deliberate questions to call this out, asking people to verbally respond, asking people to write it in the chat. We're going to talk more about this later, but also using tools of the platform like breakout rooms to really give people a chance to make those lists, to articulate those gains. Your job as a facilitator all the way through, and especially in this ending part, is to provide some activities and ways for people to, again, demonstrate that which might be more natural to talk about in person. So the online platform of group work or meeting facilitation, if rooted in this idea that we're creating a community of inquiry that's supposed to be truly interpersonal, and that if we're creating groups and ongoing staff meeting communities, we can guarantee that stage development of groups, it's happening whether you know it or not. So you might as well use it. And it has, both of those ideas have every application in the online environment. They work whether you're in person or not. So thinking about being a facilitator of an online experience, how do you facilitate process when a good portion of what you're used to is not at your disposal, and that which is physically being, tangibly being with other people, where you can visually view some nonverbals and some interpersonal interactions that might happen. Well, you could, if the opportunity is available to your participants, they may be chatting in the chat box or a private chat or on their phones, the way that they might do a side conversation in person. So in person, you can say, you guys, I'm going to ask you to hold a side conversation until after group or something like that. I might address it. How do you address it if you think it's happening in the online environment? I think that has a lot to do with setting up norms, naming that we know this is what happens. People multitask, people have private conversations. How do we as a group want to handle that? If you don't name that early on, it's harder to address later when you feel like it's happening or you see it happening. So the norm setting in the online environment is you have to be predicting how your participants might behave. And through our poll, we know there's a lot of prediction about multitasking, people being not comfortable with the camera on. Name those things early and come to some agreements together that can really help alleviate some of these dilemmas down the road. So again, facilitator implies you have a role to play and a job to do, and you have to get comfortable, again, I don't have another way to say it, using your authority, using your referential power, your role power to, in fact, be a little bit more active and directive in the online environment to move things forward, naming things that maybe other people can't see or won't name as participants in the way that they would if they were in person. So your job is to manage technology, knowing how to use it, and then also knowing how to help your participants in a way that they feel ready to say, I don't know how to do that, or can someone help me, and be patient with people as they find their way in the various platforms that we use in these experiences. So observing and managing interpersonal dynamics. We've all been to a staff meeting that is not informed by the stages of group development and not informed by some of these good practices like having an agenda, having a clear facilitator, and managing interpersonal dynamics. We've been to the staff meeting where it's not clear what the agenda is. It's not clear who the facilitator is, or there's some sort of side odd communication that happens in the room and no one says or does anything about it or handles it, and everyone leaves the meeting and says, oh my God, did you see that happen? And now they don't want to come back next time because it just feels weird in the room. Your job as a facilitator is to ensure that that which is as much as possible underground gets brought above ground, that you can name it and tame it, that you can name it and work with it. So if you see someone roll their eyes on screen, important for you to say, man, I just noticed, Sally, you just had sort of an expression on your face that made me wonder, what are you thinking? That you do that in no different way than you would if you were in person, managing interpersonal dynamics, noticing how people are engaged or not engaged. Paying attention. This is where two facilitators is wonderful. You got someone paying attention to raised hands or the chat box. You can't always have the luxury of having two people facilitate a meeting or a group. So why host a virtual meeting, a group, or a classroom training online? Two reasons: to foster connection between people and to create time and space for collaboration to achieve some sort of task. Now that task may well be about personal growth, or that task may well be about some sort of work project that you've got to, address the policies or make some sort of, final presentation somewhere. If you can send a memo to achieve your ends, don't hold a virtual meeting. If you're just going to send information, don't hold a meeting. You can send information, people can read. But you really want to create an experience where people can work together to feel and be connected, to be a part of a community, and to achieve a particular outcome. Again, personal growth support is an outcome or an actual product, something that people create together. It's important to know your audience. Is this group just starting? If so, that you're really in a terrific spot because you get to start fresh. But if you have been operating over time and all of a sudden today you think, oh man, we didn't do any of that, or we didn't do that one thing, it's never too late. You get to come back to group or to that meeting and say, this week I was thinking about something. I was thinking about how we might have skipped a step when we were first getting started. And we never really talked about some norms and expectations that will really serve us well. And I'd like to take some time as a group to establish and create some norms and expectations. How do we want to operate? And what will really allow us to function really well as a group? And you put people in small groups or paired discussion, or you use a tool like Whiteboard or Jamboard from Google to have people all participate in making a contribution, or you have them put it in the chat box. But it's never too late if you feel like you've missed something from an earlier stage of group development to come back to it and begin again. Let's see. This idea of having clarity of purpose. Great if I understand the purpose of this 8-week group, but if my participants or members don't have that same understanding, then so what? So you've got, as a facilitator online, no different than an in-person, you've got to take some time to ensure that you've got shared meaning, that everyone's on the same page. So again, how do you do that? You do that in verbally with the full group. You do that in paired conversation where people feel a little bit more comfortable talking with just one other person on camera. You use those tools that allow people to contribute their ideas in writing. And you post or list those outcomes, those norms and shared meaning, commitments to norms somewhere in your group platform. Providing a clear agenda and structure. I've commented on this, don't be afraid to direct traffic. This is super important online. It gives people permission. It gives people, well, in some ways, it gives people permission not to multitask, because if you're going to be calling on people and that becomes the habit or the norm of the group, then people have another reason to pay attention, right? Mary might call on me because that seems to be how we flow in this group. We don't just, say, does anybody have anything to say? And then we wait and nobody says anything and then we move on. So providing a clear agenda and having that somehow visually posted is also really helpful online, just as it is in person. What else do I want to say? I commented on this earlier. I think a great way to establish engagement online is to name the fact that there are some people in this room who are super verbal like me and not at all shy about being on camera and are going to have no problem expressing my opinions or answering questions very quickly. And then there are going to be some people in this room, in our group, in our meeting, that are kind of camera shy and it feels awkward. And they might be more of an internal processor, they're less verbal than me. But I can tell that they're still very engaged. They're paying attention and maybe they write in the chat box. As a facilitator of an online meeting, important for you to name these two kind of extreme ways of being and give permission that there's lots of ways to be engaged and to demonstrate that you're engaged in this meeting. If you're a person who's quite verbal, it's a helpful hint to give to your group or participants. How about if you're apt to speak up quickly, pause for a minute. And if you're a person who's more apt to stay quiet, push yourself to be out loud a little quicker than you might normally do so. And we'll probably meet ourselves in the middle so that we don't have the same three people who are verbal in this engagement in this online platform, and the rest of the group is either quiet or only does the chat as a way to engage. Give people many ways to engage in this online platform. And again, to me, I like to state the obvious. It is obvious. People are uncomfortable on camera. People have a hard time not multitasking while they're sitting at their computer. So give them some tips about how to, create their screens so that they're only looking at the meeting and they're not shopping for shoes while they're online. So give people, name the common pitfalls and challenges to engagement, and then give your participants some ideas for how they can eliminate those pitfalls, and then brainstorm amongst the participants. What have you done that helps you remain engaged and not multitask while you're in this group? Always thinking about the length of a meeting, time of day, and taking breaks. Online especially is so important. We've been sitting on our butts for 2 years. I mean, most of us in our professions. We've really got to be thoughtful about that. Okay. Some fun ways to think about creating culture. If we're trying to create a community of inquiry that overtly addresses cognitive, teacher and teaching, and social presence, we're trying to create a culture. So how you start a meeting can really shift that. So is the culture of your meeting enjoyment and kind of casual to begin with, which can be a nice way for people to enter the room. If we're in person, there's oftentimes food, or there's, the lighting can be a certain way, or the room feels good. So in the Zoom planet, can you have a waiting room and pull everybody in at the same time so that you don't have this odd feeling that we've all felt when you're the first one in the Zoom room and the facilitator? Can you have music playing as you pull everybody into the room and just let people just be and kind of get settled and get connected while they're enjoying some music? Can you start your meetings with a grounding exercise, no different than we would do in person? Asking people just to put both feet on the floor, okay, kind of clear your desk a little bit. We're going to take 3 deep breaths. I'm going to ask you to either turn off your camera or close your eyes, whatever you'd like to do that's going to help you get here. And we'll take a little bit of time for some breathing and some grounding, and then I'm going to ring a bell and we're all going to come back. Simple, ritualized ways of getting started are even more important in the virtual world than they are maybe in person. Let's see. Ask useful, focused, and relevant check-in and check-out questions. I don't care if you're facilitating a staff meeting, a team meeting, or a therapy group. Check-in questions, check-out questions are really helpful. A really good question is, we're going to go around today. I want to hear from everybody. What's one thing you need from today's meeting? Or what's one thing you were hoping to get out of today's meeting? Sally, would you go first? Go for it. Sam, nice. Okay. And no comment about any of these things, but just to get it in the room. You can do the same thing, put it in the chat box, and then you read it out or ask somebody in the group to do a little shared leadership and let them read out of the chat box. Almost like when you have kids in the classroom, you got some kids that are less engaged. Well, give them a job. So now you give somebody else a chance to read what gets written in the chat box, and it's not only your voice in the room. Have some fun with those check-in and check-out questions. Scaling questions are a terrific barometer for you as a facilitator to get a read on where are people. 1 to 10. 10 is, oh my gosh, you are so excited for a group today. You've just been thinking about it all week. You can't wait. You just love getting to this group. And 1 is, oh my goodness, I drag my feet. I'm having a hard time connecting here. And give tons of permission that it doesn't matter the number and you don't have to explain it, but let's just go around the room and see where people are. Or please just put in the chat box, where are you today in terms of being at group? Beginnings, middles, and ends of stages of group development have every application for a single session as it does for an 8-week or a 10-week experience. So how you start really matters. You might start to ritualize, maybe a different person from your team or from the group is responsible for the check-in each week. So now, again, you've got another way for people to engage in this online platform because everybody has a job. Okay. You have to be authentic and be yourself. I think stating the obvious, how are you as a facilitator? How do you feel about this online planet? And how are you making sense of getting what you need in a meeting or a group through Zoom? What do you struggle with? I think it's okay to be authentic and genuine about that, as long as the upshot of the message is, I believe we can do our work this way. I believe that this has value. Without Zoom, what would life have been like for the last 2 years? For those of you who are a part of this therapy group, or for those of you who are trying to facilitate a strong, effective, functioning team. Without this, we really would have sunk. We didn't sink because this has some value. This has much to do with that notion of teaching presence. Who are you and how do you show up to hold a space and create a tone and a sense of this time is valued. Being with each other is a valued time. Let's see. Integrating visually compelling tools throughout the meeting. You can share your screen to be sharing, images, pictures, instead of just text PowerPoints to make your points or to kind of draw people in. More conversation there about fostering connections, using breakout rooms, etc. Let's see. Always asking yourself, how am I creating space in this online environment for my team or my group to actually do? That doing can be discussion, verbal. That doing can be written discussion. That doing can be in a breakout room. That doing can be creating something together in small groups. That doing can be in the educational setting, it's common to have role plays. So I might ask for 2 participants. Would you guys volunteer to do a role play? Here's the setup. You're the social worker and you're the client. This is your first meeting. And then the rest of us, we're going to be observers. And what I want you to observe is I want you to watch for 3 skills that the social worker really practiced well. Then you give them the opportunity to do the role play and the fishbowl, and then you facilitate the discussion thereafter. But now everybody has a job to do, and we're doing an activity. consider that idea of shared leadership. We think it's really excellent at keeping everybody involved so that the job of this meeting isn't always only the facilitator's role and responsibility. Let's see. This has to do with just kind of platform related issues. You have to understand certainly the ethical and legal implications of the setting or the platform that you're using. So in education, of course, paying attention to all things FERPA, and in mental health, certainly HIPAA compliant platforms and confidentiality. Helping participants who are participating in a meeting or a group from home, like we all are, how do you help them find some kind of private space? Today, I gratefully remembered to turn my ringers off on my phone and turn my iPad off so it wouldn't ring in the middle of this meeting. So helping your participants think of the barriers in their environment that might interrupt their ability to stay really present and engaged and participating in the group or the meeting. Experiment with other platforms. I have mostly used Zoom, but I know a lot of people have used DoxyMe in therapy settings, or Google Suite, Google Hangout. Play around and experiment. I think that online facilitating of meetings as well as groups and therapy groups and support groups, it's here to stay. I think that this will always be a part of our work. And no matter the context that you all talked about in the poll, I think maybe some people are going to go back to work in person full time, but I think plenty of people are going to remain online. I'm one of them. I'm going to continue to do my supervision groups and supervision practice, online coaching, virtual via Zoom, with no intention of going back. And I am a firm believer that I think we can create community if we're intentional in these ways, even informed by community of inquiry model, even informed by basic stages of group development and predicting what's going to happen, what needs to happen, and what's your role in it. And then if we can be thoughtful and proactive about experimenting with and practicing our own, being adept at using the computer, the online platforms, the Zoom, the extra fun tools like Jamboard, and there are a million of them. I'm actually creating an online game to use with my supervision clients because I want to have my Zoom meetings be more, I want them to be more creative than the 6 or 7 of us talking in a supervision meeting verbally and looking at each other. I have a company that's creating an online game that we're going to use as a way to think through the practice test for the licensing exam for social workers, and also just to have social workers thinking about the key concepts related to their social work practice, ethics, professionalism, diagnosis and treatment planning. But it's going to be an online game that we all participate in at the same time while we're online via Zoom. So get creative, I guess is my point, because I do think that online groups, staff meetings, trainings, education, it's here to stay. With that, 9 minutes before the end of the hour, that's all I have for you all. There's my contact information.